Vera, I think it's time you started looking for another place to live." Her voice was calm, almost rehearsed, like she'd practiced it in front of a mirror. I was halfway through, buttering my toast, the knife stopping midair as my mind caught up to the words. Marcy sat across from me at the breakfast table, her hands resting on her stomach, in that way women do when they want the world to remember they're pregnant. Her nails were perfectly painted, her expression soft but firm, an actress delivering her big line, "I need peace and quiet for the baby." She continued her tone, dipping into something that sounded like sympathy. "The doctor says stress isn't good for either of us and, well, having too many people in the house right now is just overwhelming." I set the knife down and reached for my coffee. Too many people. My voice was steady, but my heartbeat wasn't. She gave a small shrug. "It's nothing personal. I just think it would be healthier for everyone if you had your own space. Somewhere quieter, you understand." The silence that followed was heavy. Damon sat at the end of the table pretending to scroll on his phone. He didn't look up once. "How long," I asked, "do I have before this new chapter of yours begins?" Marcy brightened, as if relieved I wasn't making a scene. "Oh well, maybe a month. That should give you enough time to find a nice senior apartment. I've actually looked at a few brochures." She reached for a folder on the counter and slid it toward me like she was offering a gift. I didn't touch it. My name, just my first name, was scribbled in marker across the top of the folder. Neat, tidy, decisive. The kitchen smelled faintly of the cinnamon rolls I'd baked that morning, but it no longer felt like my kitchen. Marcy had changed the curtains last week. She'd replaced my blue ceramic bowls with her white porcelain ones. Little by little, my life had been pushed into the margins. "I'll think about it," I said, my voice low. She smiled, satisfied. "I knew you'd understand. It's what's best for the baby." Her palm smoothed over her stomach again, her gaze flicking to Damon as if to pull him into her side. He nodded once, still not looking at me. I sipped my coffee, letting the bitterness coat my tongue. A month. She thought I'd be gone in a month. The rest of breakfast passed in forced politeness. I cleared my plate and rinsed it at the sink, my back to them, my mind already sorting through the layers of what had just happened. This wasn't a request, it was an eviction dressed in pastel words. When I finally left the kitchen, I didn't go upstairs. Instead, I stepped outside onto the porch, the chill in the early air sharper than I expected. The lake shimmered in the distance, its surface calm, as if it knew nothing of the small storm brewing inside my home. I stood there until I heard Marcy's laugh from inside, followed by the low murmur of Damon's voice. They thought I'd take my coffee in my folder of options and quietly fade into another zip code. They thought wrong. "The doctor says I have to be careful about my stress levels." She dropped that line into the air like it was medical law, standing at the kitchen counter with a smoothie in her hand. I had just come in from the garden dirt still under my fingernails when she decided to offer her diagnosis of the household. "It's not just about me," she went on, stirring the drink with a reusable straw. "It's about the baby. Any unnecessary tension could be harmful. And lately," she let her voice trail off her eyes, settling on me like a final verdict. "Lately?" I asked. Marcy glanced over her shoulder, clearly waiting for Damon to back her up. He was at the table, laptop open, but screen dark, which told me he'd been listening all along. She sighed, as if this was difficult for her. "Lately, there's been a lot of noise and misunderstandings. You're up early, moving around, making phone calls. I call my sister on Tuesdays," I said. "At 10. Her smile was small, patient, the kind you give someone who doesn't understand their own faults. "I know, but for me, that's right in the middle of my morning rest. My body needs to recharge." She placed a hand on her stomach, fingers splayed like a shield. "It's just not an ideal environment." I looked at Damon. His jaw worked like he was chewing on words he didn't want to say. "She's not wrong, Mom," he finally muttered. "The doctor did mention avoiding stress." The word mom felt strange in that moment, like it was there only out of obligation. "So I'm the stress?" I asked quietly. No one's saying that, Damon said, eyes flicking toward Marcy. Her tone was softer now, almost coaxing. "It's just, you've lived here a long time, and maybe you've gotten used to doing things your way." Which is fine, of course, but with a baby on the way, we have to think about what's healthiest. What's healthiest, I repeated more to myself than to her. I had worked 30 years in an emergency room. I'd been screamed at, vomited on, even shoved into walls by panicked patients. I knew what real stress was. And somehow, the sound of me talking to my sister at 10 in the morning was the danger here. "I'll try to be quieter," I said, keeping my tone even. Marcy tilted her head like she was considering my offer, but the slight downturn of her mouth told me it wasn't enough. "I just think long term, it's best for all of us if you have your own place, somewhere you can live without worrying about tiptoeing around." I didn't answer. Damon shut his laptop. The click loud in the stillness. "Let's not make this into a fight," he said. Marcy slipped her arm through his, leaning into him as they left the kitchen together. Their voices lowered as they moved down the hall, a private conversation resuming where I wasn't invited. I stayed at the counter, my hands braced on the cool stone. Stress. That was the story now. A medical excuse wrapped in concern, stamped with Damon's reluctant approval. I rinsed my hands, scrubbing away the soil from the garden, but the grit under my nails stayed stubborn. Some things didn't wash off so easily. From the living room, I heard Marcy's laugh. Light, satisfied. It reminded me of something rehearsed. And I wondered, not for the first time, if my own son was reading from a script she'd written. Marcy waited until Damon came home from work before unveiling her next move. I was at the dining table sorting through the week's mail when she walked in with a bright, glossy brochure in her hand. "We found something for you," she said, her voice carrying that bright cheer people use when they've already decided what's best for you. I didn't answer right away. She set the brochure down in front of me, flipping it open to a page with a photo of a narrow studio apartment. White walls, a kitchenette barely bigger than a closet, and a single window looking out over a parking lot. "It's called Maple Grove Senior Living," she said, sliding into the chair opposite me. "Quiet, safe, and only 20 minutes from here. We thought you'd love it." "We." The word hung in the air between us. Damon took the seat at the head of the table, loosening his tie like he wanted this conversation over before it even began. "They've got social activities, a common dining area, even a shuttle for errands." Marcy continued, tapping the page like she was pointing out luxury features. "You wouldn't have to worry about maintaining a whole house anymore. No yard work, no repairs." "I don't mind yard work," I said. "Well, sure, but you shouldn't have to," she countered smoothly. "This way you can just relax. Focus on yourself. And we can focus on getting ready for the baby." I looked from the brochure to Damon. He kept his gaze low, tracing a line on the table with his finger. "It's not a bad idea, Mom," he said finally. "It's small," I replied. "It's cozy," Marcy corrected. I closed the brochure and slid it back toward her. "And it's across town." "That's the point," she said, still smiling. "You'd have your own space and we'd have ours. Less stress all around. You could still visit, of course." "Of course." I let the silence stretch, watching her shift in her seat. Damon reached for his water glass, avoiding eye contact. "Maple Grove has a move-in special right now," Marcy added, as if urgency might push me over the edge. "If we start the paperwork this week, you could be settled in before the baby comes." Perfect timing. Her hand found Damon's on the table. He didn't pull away. I leaned back in my chair. "Did you forget whose name is on the deed to this house that made her blink? Just once." Then she recovered, laughing lightly as if I'd made a charming joke. "No one's forgetting anything, Vera. We just want what's best for everyone." The air in the room shifted. Damon set down his glass. Let's not get defensive, he said. I stood, gathering the rest of the mail into a neat stack. I'll think about it. My tone left no room for interpretation, but Marcy still tried to mask her irritation with another smile. Sure, she said, her voice as bright as when she'd walked in, but don't wait too long. These places fill up fast. I walked out of the dining room without answering the brochure still on the table between them. In the hallway, I could hear Marcy's low voice and Damon's quiet replies. I didn't catch the words, but I didn't need to. I already knew the plan they thought they were building together. It started with the curtains. I came downstairs one morning to find the blue and cream ones I'd sewn years ago folded into a cardboard box by the front door. In their place hung sheer white panels that looked like something out of a rental catalog. Just brightening things up, Marcy said when she caught me looking. The natural light will be so much better for the baby. I didn't remember being consulted. By the end of that week, my framed photographs family trips my late husband smiling in front of the lake Damon as a boy with his first fishing rod were missing from the mantel. In their place, a vase of faux eucalyptus and a generic canvas print of pastel flowers. They're in storage, Marcy said when I asked. The boxes multiplied. One appeared at the foot of the stairs filled with my books from the living room shelves. Another sat by the back door holding the ceramic serving dishes I'd collected over decades. Marcy labeled each one in her neat handwriting, always with the same word, kitchen, mom's or den, mom's. I wondered if she realized what she was doing, how methodical it felt. This wasn't spring cleaning. This was erasure in stages. One afternoon, I walked into the dining room to find her standing on a chair, swapping out the chandelier bulbs for something warmer. Damon was at work. Thought I'd make dinner lighting more cozy, she said, stepping down with a smile. We want the house to feel calm, you know. I didn't answer. Later, I noticed the cedar chest that had always sat at the foot of my bed was gone. I found it in the garage, shoved against a wall, dust settling on the carved lid. When I tried to move it back upstairs, Marcy appeared in the doorway. Oh, I thought we could use that space for the bassinet, she said. It'll be so sweet to have the baby close at night. In my room, I asked. Her pause was brief, but telling. Well, for now, yes. Until you move, of course. I left the chest where it was. Not because I agreed, but because I'd learned something important in that moment. She wasn't just planning for me to leave, she was rehearsing the house without me. By the weekend, my favorite armchair was covered with a new slipcover to match the throw pillows, and the old quilt I kept on the couch for chilly mornings was folded away in a hall closet. I watched it all happen without comment, the way you watch an incoming storm from a porch, knowing you can't stop the wind, but you can decide when to close the door. One evening, Damon came home while Marcy was in the middle of rearranging the hallway. She had taken down the framed cross-stitch my mother made me and was replacing it with a round mirror. He didn't ask why. He didn't even pause. He just kissed her cheek, glanced my way with a tight smile, and went upstairs. That told me everything I needed to know. If Marcy was the storm, Damon had decided to stand in the rain with her. And I couldn't tell yet if he even noticed he was getting wet. I was in the front yard, trimming back the rose bushes, when I saw Lorraine from 3 doors down, making her way over Sunhat, tilted sunglasses perched low on her nose. Lorraine wasn't the type to come by without reason when she showed up. It usually meant she had something to share. You've been busy, she said, eyeing the growing pile of cut branches. Trying to keep ahead of the weeds, I replied, brushing dirt from my gloves. She glanced toward the house, then lowered her voice. I saw Marcy the other day. Thought it was strange she didn't mention where she was going. I straightened, sensing the undercurrent. Where was that? The parking lot by the Crescent Hotel? Lorraine said, her eyes flicking back to mine. She wasn't alone. There was a man with her tall, dark hair, nice suit. Not Damon. I forced a neutral expression. People meet friends for lunch there all the time. She wasn't eating lunch, Lorraine said. One eyebrow arched. She was holding his hand. They were laughing about something standing so close, I thought they were going to kiss right there in the lot. The air seemed to shift, the sun suddenly hotter on my shoulders. You're sure? Lorraine nodded. Saw it with my own eyes. They didn't see me, probably too caught up in each other. I didn't recognize him, but he wasn't anyone from around here. She hesitated, studying me. I figured you'd want to know. I thanked her, my voice, even though my mind was running in quick, sharp turns. After she walked away, I stayed in the yard trimming without seeing what I was cutting. The image lodged itself in my head, a stranger's hand covering Marcy's, her laugh spilling out the way it never did around Damon. By the time I put away my tools, the question had already formed. Why was she meeting a man in secret, while parading her pregnancy like a badge of honor in my kitchen? That evening, I watched her more closely. She came home late, claiming she'd been shopping for nursery decor. A new scarf, silk pale blue, hung loose around her neck. Damon, oblivious, helped her carry in a shopping bag that looked far too small to hold anything for a baby. I asked what she'd bought. She held up a single plush blanket, still with the store tag. Just something soft for the crib, she said, her smile fixed. No mention of lunch, the hotel, or a man in a suit. Later, from my spot in the living room, I saw her slip into the hallway with her phone speaking in a low tone I couldn't catch. When Damon called her from the kitchen, she ended the call quickly, tucking the phone into her pocket before joining him. I said nothing, but the weight of Lorraine's words stayed with me. In a house already shifting beneath my feet, this felt like the first loose brick in the foundation, and I knew that if there was one crack in Marcy's perfect facade, there would be more. It was close to midnight when I heard it. A low, deep voice drifting in from the living room. Damon was on the night shift at the site, something he'd mentioned over breakfast, so I knew it wasn't him. I couldn't sleep, so I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, the hum of the heater filling the quiet. That's when I caught it, a sound just faint enough to make me doubt it was real. At first, I thought the TV was on, but then came the soft rise and fall of conversation. Two people speaking, the cadence too natural to be scripted dialogue. I slipped on my robe and eased my bedroom door open. The voice came again, clearer this time. Male. Confident. You've really made yourself at home here. And then Marcy's laugh, low, not the bright public one she used around Damon, but something softer, warmer. Well, it's not hard when there's so much to work with. I moved down the hall slowly, my bare feet silent on the carpet. The living room light spilled faintly into the corridor, and from the doorway, I could see Marcy curled on the sofa, her legs tucked beneath her, a glass of red wine in hand. The man sat across from her in Damon's recliner, one ankle resting casually over his knee. His suit jacket hung over the arm of the chair. I could only see the back of his head, thick, dark hair neatly cut. I told you not to worry, he said, leaning forward. It's just a matter of time. Once everything's settled, you'll have what you want. Marcy swirled her wine, smiling into the glass. I know. I just need to be careful. Damon's not suspicious yet. The words tightened something in my chest. Not suspicious yet. I stayed in the shadow of the hallway, every instinct telling me to step in to confront them right there. But I didn't. Not yet. Instead, I backed away slowly. My breath measured my pulse loud in my ears. In the kitchen, I filled a glass with water just for the sound of it, to announce my presence without stepping into the living room. A moment later, Marcy appeared in the doorway alone. Couldn't sleep, she asked, her tone casual. Just thirsty, I said, sipping from the glass. I thought I heard voices. Oh, the TV, she said quickly. I was watching a show, but I turned it off. Her cheeks were faintly flushed, though whether from wine or something else I couldn't tell. She didn't mention the man, and I didn't mention that I knew. "I'll head back up," I said. She nodded, brushing past me toward the stairs. I listened for the sound of the front door, but none came. Either he'd left before I made it to the kitchen, or he was still in my house. I waited another 10 minutes before going back to my room, closing the door quietly behind me. There was no mistaking what I'd heard, and there was no mistaking the laugh I'd never once heard her use with my son. It started with a single night. Damon came into the kitchen after dinner, keys in hand, saying he might crash at his friend Owen's place. "Marcy's been feeling cooped up," he explained, "and I think she just needs a little space." I was washing the last of the dishes. "Space from what I asked?" He shrugged, avoiding my eyes. "You know the noise, the energy. The usual stuff. It's not you, Mom. She's just pregnant and tired." I dried my hands, slowly. "So your solution is to sleep somewhere else?" "It's temporary," he said already, halfway toward the door. "Just until she's more comfortable." That temporary night turned into 3, then a week. He'd stop by to grab a change of clothes, muttering something about helping Owen with a project or late work meetings. He'd hug Marcy at the door, ask about the baby, and be gone before the sun set. The house felt heavier without him, not because he was a constant presence before, but because his absence left Marcy freer. She moved through the rooms like she owned them, rearranging the pantry, pulling my quilts out of the linen closet, deciding which dishes went where. One afternoon, I asked Damon when he thought he might be back for good. He was standing in the driveway, his duffel bag slung over his shoulder. "I don't know," he said. "She seems calmer when it's just her here." "Calmer?" I repeated. "It's better for the baby," he added quickly, like that would end the conversation. I bit back the words I wanted to say, that the baby wasn't the one dictating these changes, and that space was just another way to push me toward the door. Instead, I asked, "And where does that leave you?" He didn't answer. He just kissed my cheek. The gesture brief, almost distracted, and got into his truck. The evenings became a pattern. Marcy cooking small meals for herself, her phone always within reach. Soft laughter drifting from the living room when she thought I was upstairs. More and more I'd hear her moving around after midnight, the sound of a door opening quietly, then closing again. When I asked Damon about it over the phone, he brushed it off. "She's probably just restless. You know how it is." I did know. I knew what it looked like when someone was building a life that didn't include you. And I knew my son was handing her the keys to make it happen. By the second week, his overnight bag never left his truck. He'd swing by in the mornings, sometimes grab coffee, kiss her forehead, and be gone again. We barely spoke beyond pleasantries, and even those felt rehearsed. One morning, I caught him in the garage rummaging through a box of my late husband's tools. "She wants to hang some shelves," he said, when he noticed me watching. "I'll do it when I have time." "You could do them now," I suggested. He glanced toward the door leading into the house. "She's resting. I don't want to wake her." And just like that, he was gone again, the sound of his truck fading down the street. That night, sitting alone at the kitchen table, I realized something. Damon wasn't just giving Marcy space. He was giving her the house piece by piece, night by night. I'd only been gone for a few hours, an errand across town to pick up some sewing supplies. The street was quiet when I pulled into the driveway, but as soon as I opened the front door, a wave of laughter and chatter rolled out toward me. Balloons bobbed in the hallway. Pink and white streamers crisscrossed the entry. And in my living room, at least 20 women stood shoulder to shoulder, balancing paper plates piled with cake and finger sandwiches. In the center of it all was Marcy, glowing under the attention, a sash slung across her chest that read, "Mom-to-be." She was holding court, opening a gift wrapped in silver paper while everyone watched. The moment she spotted me in the doorway, her smile tightened like a drawstring. "Oh, Vera," she said loud enough for the whole room to hear, but with none of the warmth her tone pretended to carry. I didn't think you'd be back so soon. I didn't think I'd be walking into a party, I replied, stepping further into the room. It's just a little baby shower, she said, waving a hand. Damon and I thought it would be simpler to keep it small. Small apparently meant inviting everyone but me. I scanned the walls, my chest tightening. Every frame that once held family photographs my wedding day. Damon's high school graduation snapshots of summer barbecues was now filled with black and white ultrasound prints. On the mantel, where my late husband's portrait had sat for decades, was a three-dimensional ultrasound image in a gilt frame, the kind people ordered as keepsakes. How nice, one of the women said to me, her smile polite but puzzled. You must be so excited to be a grandmother. I managed a thin smile. Of course. I drifted toward the kitchen, partly to get out of the crowd and partly to catch my breath. The counters were covered with trays of appetizers and bowls of pastel candies. My good china set I only brought out for holidays was laid out with cookies shaped like baby bottles and rattles. From the doorway, I watched Marcy glide between guests, her hand resting protectively on her stomach, her voice pitched to carry just enough. We'll have the nursery all ready by next month, she told a cluster of women. It's so nice having the extra space in the house now. Extra space? The phrase hit like a stone. I noticed Lorraine from down the street standing near the punch bowl. She caught my eye and gave a tiny shrug, as if to say she'd assumed I'd been told. I didn't linger. I slipped out the back door, crossing the yard to the far corner by the lilac bushes. From there, I could still hear the rise and fall of voices, the bursts of laughter. It wasn't just a party. It was a performance, and every missing photograph, every replaced frame, every polite half-smile from a stranger told me exactly what role I was supposed to play, none at all. By the time I re-entered through the garage, the sound of tearing wrapping paper echoed down the hall. I took the long way to my room, the walls lined with those ultrasound prints where my life used to be. And I knew then this wasn't the beginning of them erasing me. It had been happening for a long time. I didn't go back to my room to hide. Not this time. Instead, I slipped my phone from my pocket and opened the camera. From the doorway of the hallway, half hidden by the edge of the wall, I began snapping quiet photographs. I caught faces I'd never seen before, well-dressed men and women who clearly weren't neighbors or Damon's co-workers. One man in particular stood out, tall, dark hair, expensive watch glinting under the light. The same build as the one I'd glimpsed in my living room weeks ago. He was leaning close to Marcy now, his hand brushing hers as he passed her a small envelope. She tucked it into her sash in one smooth motion, glancing toward the crowd before smiling up at him. My phone caught the moment in perfect clarity. I moved to the kitchen, pretending to refill a glass of water, and left the recorder on my phone running. Guests floated in and out, but eventually Marcy joined a woman in the far corner. Someone I didn't recognize. They spoke in hushed tones, but the microphone caught enough. He'll take care of everything once the baby's here, Marcy said. Her voice carried that smug, satisfied note I'd come to recognize. The woman laughed lightly. And Damon still has no idea. Why would he? Marcy replied. He's too busy trying to keep me comfortable. Once the timing is right, we'll make the move. I kept my back to them, rinsing an already clean glass, every muscle tight. My recorder kept running. When she drifted away again, I checked my phone. 3 minutes of audio, her words as clear as a confession. I saved the file and sent a copy to my private email. Then I did the same with the photographs. Later, when the last guest left and the house fell quiet, I walked into the living room. Streamers sagged over the furniture, crumbs littered the coffee table, and the ultrasound print still stared at me from the mantel. Marcy was in the kitchen humming to herself as she put leftovers into containers. Big day, I said, leaning against the doorway. She looked over her shoulder, smiling like a hostess after a successful event. It was perfect. I only nodded. I'm sure it was. She didn't ask where I'd been during the party. She didn't need to. The less I said, the more she believed she was in control. But now, I had something she didn't know about something that could undo her neat little performance. That night, long after she'd gone upstairs, I sat at my desk in the corner of my room, headphones in, listening to the recording again. The certainty in her voice when she said he'll take care of everything made my skin crawl. I didn't know exactly who he was yet, but I knew one thing for certain: he wasn't my son. And whoever he was part of a plan I intended to uncover. The next morning, I drove into town under the pretense of running errands. Instead of stopping at the market, I parked in front of a small brick building with a gold-lettered sign, Harlan and Tate, attorneys at law. I'd called the day before, booking an early slot. I didn't want anyone in that house asking where I'd gone. Mr. Tate was a compact man with sharp eyes and a voice that carried an easy authority. He ushered me into his office, closed the door, and gestured to the leather chair opposite his desk. "I've reviewed the documents you sent over." He began sliding a manila folder toward me. "The property deed is in your name alone. There's no joint ownership with your son, no lien, no encumbrances of any kind. In plain terms, Mrs. Caro, this is your house." The weight in my chest eased, but only slightly. "So I can ask them to leave." "You can more than ask," he said. "You can serve a notice to vacate, and if they refuse, proceed with formal eviction. Given the circumstances, you're well within your rights." I sat back, the words sinking in. For months, I'd felt like a guest in my own home. Hearing it laid out so plainly was almost dizzying. He leaned forward, folding his hands. "However, I'd recommend caution. Once you serve notice, things escalate quickly. People show their true colors when they realize their position is about to change." I thought of Marcy's voice on the recording, the photographs on my phone, the man in the living room who wasn't my son. "What are you suggesting, Patience?" he said. "You have the legal advantage. Use it to gather every piece of evidence you can. If there are financial improprieties, hidden relationships, document them. The cleaner your case, the harder it will be for them to spin a story against you." I traced the edge of the folder with my fingertip. "And if I wait too long," he gave a small, knowing smile. "That's your judgment call. The question is whether you want to win quickly or decisively." When I left the office, the sun was higher, spilling across the quiet street. I walked back to my car slowly, the folder under my arm, feeling the steady thrum of resolve building beneath my ribs. By the time I turned into my driveway, the house looked exactly as it had when I left, peaceful. From the outside, a storm brewing behind the door. Marcy was in the kitchen, tapping at her phone. She looked up briefly. "Get everything you needed?" "Yes," I said, setting my purse down. Everything I needed, and more than she would ever guess. It was the following Saturday when I heard the voices again, this time, not in secret, but spilling openly into the front yard. Cars lined the street, and the sound of laughter floated through the air as I walked up the driveway from the mailbox. Through the open front door, I caught sight of a crowd gathered in the living room, drinks in hand. Marcy stood at the center like she owned the place, gesturing grandly toward the mantel. "We've been working so hard on the renovations," she was saying to a small circle of guests. "It's taken some time, but I'm finally making this house mine." The words were said lightly like a joke, but her tone carried an undercurrent of truth, and the nods from her audience told me they believed her. I stepped inside, closing the door behind me. Conversations quieted just enough for a few heads to turn. Marcy glanced over her shoulder, her smile tightening. "Oh, Vera's here," she said, as if I were an afterthought, someone who'd wandered in from the street. I walked into the middle of the room, feeling every pair of eyes follow me. "Honey," I said evenly, "this is my house." For a moment, you could hear nothing but the faint clink of ice in someone's glass. Marcy blinked, her smile freezing in place. One of the guests, a tall woman in a red sweater, looked between us. "I thought you two co-owned it." "No." I said, keeping my voice calm but firm. It's in my name, always has been. I bought it long before my son was married. A flicker passed over Marcy's face, something between irritation and the effort to maintain composure. Of course, she said, with a brittle laugh. I just meant, you know, making it feel like a home for the baby. I didn't look away. A home for the baby is one thing. Claiming it as yours is another. The red sweater woman's eyebrows arched. A murmur went through the small group before someone quickly changed the subject to the hors d'oeuvres. Marcy excused herself to the kitchen a moment later, her steps clipped. I followed, not because I needed to, but because I wanted her to feel my presence. She was fussing with the cheese board when I stepped in behind her. That was unnecessary, she said, without turning around. What's unnecessary, I replied, is you parading my home as yours in front of people who don't know better. She turned, then her chin lifting. It will be mine, eventually. Damon and I cut her off. Damon and you don't own a single square inch of this property. And I'd suggest you stop speaking as if you do. Her eyes narrowed, but she didn't answer. Instead, she set the cheese knife down with a sharp click and brushed past me, rejoining her guests with a smile so forced it might as well have been painted on. I lingered in the kitchen for a few minutes, letting the weight of my words settle in the air. The conversations outside had taken on a slightly different tone, lower, with the occasional glance in my direction. Marcy might have been able to replace my photographs and rearrange my furniture, but she couldn't rewrite the deed, and now everyone in that room knew it. By the end of the evening, the smirk she'd worn when I walked in was nowhere to be found. It had been replaced with something else, something I planned to widen into a crack. 2 days after the gathering, I decided it was time to stop letting my ownership be just words. The opportunity came sooner than expected. Damon was actually home for dinner, a rare occurrence lately, and Marcy had invited 2 of her friends over to help with nursery plans. They were sitting in the living room with their coffees when I came in from my bedroom carrying a large, flat envelope. I didn't say a word at first. I walked straight to the coffee table, set the envelope down, and slid the contents out. The crisp, certified copy of the property deed lay there in full view, my name printed clearly on the first page in bold. Damon looked up from his phone, his brow furrowing. What's this? This, I said evenly, is the deed to this house. It's in my name alone. Always has been. Marcy's smile froze mid-tilt. One of her friends glanced between us, her mug halfway to her lips. Damon reached for the paper, scanning it quickly. Why are you showing us this? Because I said, meeting Marcy's eyes. I'm tired of hearing people refer to this house as if it belongs to anyone else. I wanted there to be no confusion. Marcy leaned back, folding her arms. You didn't need to make a spectacle. No, I agreed I didn't. But after months of my photographs being replaced, my things being boxed up without my say, and guests being told you're making this house yours, I decided clarity was overdue. Damon's eyes moved from the deed to his wife, lingering for a second too long. She gave a quick dismissive laugh, but it sounded brittle. It's not like I meant anything by it. People exaggerate. I reached over and tapped the page. Paper doesn't exaggerate. It tells the truth. For a moment, no one said anything. Even her friends seemed unsure whether to side with her or excuse themselves entirely. Damon finally set the deed down, his jaw tight. All right, Mom. Message received. I gathered the papers, slowly sliding them back into the envelope. Good. I'd rather we all be on the same page, literally. Marcy's smile didn't return. She excused herself to the kitchen under the pretense of checking on dinner, but I saw the stiffness in her shoulders as she walked away. Damon stayed seated, staring at the space where the deed had been, like the reality of it was sinking in deeper than he wanted to admit. I returned the envelope to my room and placed it in the desk drawer, locking it. The sound of the key turning felt final. but I knew better than to believe a single piece of paper would solve everything. If anything, it might make them more determined. And if they decided to dig in, I'd have to be ready. I waited 3 more days before making my move, long enough for the tension from the deed incident to simmer, but not long enough for them to think I'd forgotten it. That morning, I sat at the dining table with a cup of coffee and the papers I'd had drawn up by Mr. Tate. They were straightforward, a formal 30-day notice to vacate citing unauthorized occupancy removal of my personal property without consent and visible damages to the home's interior. Everything was phrased in clear, unemotional language exactly the way Tate had advised. Damon was at work, so I knew it would be Marcy who answered when I knocked on the kitchen doorframe. She was sitting at the counter, scrolling on her phone, a half-eaten bagel on a plate beside her. "What now?" she asked without looking up. I set the folded papers in front of her. "This is your formal notice. You have 30 days to leave the property." Her head jerked up. "You're evicting us." "I'm evicting unauthorized occupants," I corrected. "You do not have a rental agreement with me, and you have removed and replaced items in my home without permission. That's damage, Marcy. It's also grounds for removal." She snatched the papers, scanning the first few lines before letting out a sharp laugh. "This is cruel. I'm pregnant." "Damon's going to be furious." "Pregnancy doesn't exempt you from respecting someone else's property," I said, keeping my tone steady. "This house is not yours to claim or change as you please." She leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. "Do you have any idea how this will look?" "To everyone." "Yes," I said. "I do. Which is why I've kept records, photographs, receipts, and dates. If you want to contest the notice, I'll be ready." She stared at me for a long moment, her expression calculating. "You think this makes you strong, don't you?" "No," I said, turning toward the doorway. "It makes me unwilling to be erased." By the time Damon came home that evening, she'd clearly told him. I could hear their muffled voices in the kitchen. Hers sharp and fast, his lower, but equally tense. A chair scraped against the floor, and a moment later Damon appeared in the doorway of the living room. "Mom? Is this really necessary?" he asked, holding the notice in his hand. "It is," I said simply. He glanced back toward the kitchen, then at me. "She's carrying my child. And that child deserves stability," I said. "That doesn't mean allowing someone to dismantle my life to create it." His mouth tightened, but he didn't argue further. He left the room, and their hushed voices started up again, like a storm that hadn't decided whether to break or blow over. I went to my desk and noted the date on a sticky note, 30 days from now. Then I placed it on my calendar, marking the day I expected the house to be mine again. The next evening, Damon came into the living room while I was folding laundry. His face was drawn, the kind of expression I remembered from his teenage years when he wanted something but wasn't sure how to ask. He sat down across from me, leaning forward, elbows on his knees. "Mom," he began, his voice quieter than usual. "Can we talk about this notice thing?" I set the towel in my hands onto the pile. "There's nothing unclear about it." "I know, but 30 days. Couldn't we at least wait until after the baby's born? It's not a good time for her to be moving. Stress isn't good for." I cut him off. "Damon, do you want to stay in this house because it's your home or because it's convenient for Marcy?" He hesitated. "It's both. I don't want to put her through more than she's already dealing with." I studied him, searching his face for the certainty I used to see when he spoke about things that mattered. "Are you sure the baby is yours?" The words landed like a dropped stone. Damon blinked, his mouth parting slightly before snapping shut. "What?" His voice was barely above a whisper. "I'm asking," I said steadily, "if you're certain." "Completely certain." For a long moment he just stared at me. His gaze flicked toward the hallway, where Marcy was, then back to me. "Why would you even ask me that?" "I have my reasons," I replied, keeping my tone even. "And if you can't answer right now, Maybe you should be asking her the same thing. He sat back, running a hand over his jaw. This is ridiculous. But the conviction in his voice was missing. I picked up the towel again, folding it carefully. You know what's ridiculous? Pretending everything is fine while someone makes themselves at home in a place they've been asked to leave. He didn't respond. The silence between us stretched until Marcy's voice floated in from the kitchen, calling his name. Damon stood slowly, the notice still crumpled in his hand from the night before. He didn't look at me as he walked toward the kitchen, but I noticed his pace had slowed, like each step carried more weight than the last. I watched him go, knowing I'd planted something he couldn't ignore, and sooner or later, it would grow into a truth he couldn't unhear. It was just after 9 in the evening when my phone buzzed on the side table. I wasn't expecting any messages, and the number on the screen was unfamiliar. For a moment, I considered ignoring it, but curiosity won. The text was short, but it stopped me cold. You should see this. Beneath it were 3 attached photos. I tapped the first and felt my pulse pick up. Marcy stood on a sidewalk under the yellow glow of a street lamp, her hands on the lapels of a man's tailored suit jacket. His face was turned just enough for me to see it wasn't Damon. He was older, distinguished the kind of man who looked comfortable in money. The second photo was worse or better, depending on how you looked at it. They were kissing her fingers curled into his hair. His hand rested on the swell of her belly in a gesture far too intimate for anyone but the father. The third image showed them standing outside a hotel entrance, the man passing what looked like a key card into her hand. They were close enough that their heads touched, smiling as if they had all the time in the world. At the bottom of the message was one final line: "He's been paying for her and the baby." I sat back, my mind sifting through every offhand comment, every late-night voice I'd heard in the living room, every unexplained absence Damon had endured. This wasn't rumor or suspicion anymore. It was a truth caught in full color. My first instinct was to call Damon immediately, but I stopped myself. He was still reeling from the seed I'd planted the night before. Dropping this in his lap without preparation could make him lash out in the wrong direction. Instead, I saved the images to a secure folder on my phone and backed them up to my email. Then I sent a brief reply to the unknown number. "Who are you?" No answer came. I waited a few minutes, then locked the phone and stood pacing the length of the room. The photographs replayed in my mind in sharp detail, the way her head tilted toward him, the easy familiarity between them. She wasn't just cheating. She was building a future with someone else and using Damon's home, my home, as the staging ground. From down the hall came the faint sound of laughter. Marcy's laughter. Damon must have been home by now, oblivious as she played the part of a devoted wife. I poured myself a glass of water, taking slow, deliberate sips to steady my hands. When I finally looked at my reflection in the darkened kitchen window, my expression was calm, collected. This was more than enough to confirm what I already suspected. Now the question was how to use it quietly, strategically, so there would be no room for her to wriggle out of it. I turned off the kitchen light and headed to my room, the phone heavy in my pocket. By the time I reached the doorway, I knew exactly what my next step would be. I didn't wait long to start. The next afternoon, I found Marcy alone in the kitchen, rinsing lettuce for a salad. Damon was out, and the quiet felt like a stage set for exactly what needed to happen first. "I need to talk to you," I said, my voice steady. She glanced up, wary. About what I pulled my phone from my pocket, opened the gallery, and held the screen toward her. "About these." Her eyes flicked to the photo of her kissing the suited man outside the hotel. For half a second, the color drained from her face, but then her mouth tightened into a smirk. "That's not what it looks like." I didn't lower the phone. "It looks exactly like what it is." She shut off the water, drying her hands slowly, as if buying herself time. You're reading too much into a friendly moment. I swiped to the next image, the one with his hand on her belly. Is this friendly too? Her jaw clenched. You don't know the context. You're right, I said. I don't. But Damon will. Her eyes flared, and for the first time her voice cracked. You wouldn't. Oh, I would, I replied, slipping the phone back into my pocket. And you might want to think carefully about how this conversation goes, because you're running out of time. She didn't answer, just turned back to the sink, shoulders rigid, pretending to wash the same piece of lettuce again. That was phase 1. Phase 2 came 3 nights later, when Damon and Marcy hosted a small dinner with a few friends from his work. I'd been invited out of obligation, but this time, I accepted. The dining room was lit warmly, the table set with candles and wine glasses. The conversation flowed easily, at first talk of upcoming projects, local news. I let it roll over me, waiting for the right moment. When the plates were cleared and dessert was served, I set my phone on the table. I'd like to show you all something, I said. The chatter tapered off. Damon looked at me curiously, and Marcy froze with her fork halfway to her mouth. I tapped the screen, bringing up the photos, and turned it so the whole table could see. Silence fell like a curtain. No one spoke. The images didn't need narration. The street lamp glow, the kiss, the hand on her belly, the hotel entrance, every detail was clear. Damon's face went slack. His eyes locked on the screen. Marcy, what is this? She dropped her fork onto her plate with a clatter. It's nothing, Damon. Just a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding. His voice was sharp now. You're kissing another man. Her gaze darted around the table as if searching for someone to back her up. No one moved. Even her usual allies sat frozen wine glasses poised in midair. This isn't the place, she hissed, pushing back from the table. No, I said quietly. This is exactly the place. You've been parading lies in public for months. Now the truth gets the same treatment. Marcy's chair scraped against the floor as she stood. For a moment, I thought she'd storm out. But she stayed rooted, breathing hard, hands gripping the back of her chair. Across the table, Damon's face hardened in a way I hadn't seen before. And I knew then this was only the beginning of the unraveling. The house was too quiet after the guests left. Damon lingered at the table, staring at the empty plates, as though the crumbs might spell out an answer. Marcy had retreated to the bedroom, the soft click of the door shutting behind her, the only sign she intended to face him at all. I busied myself in the kitchen, rinsing glasses, giving him the space to make his choice. It didn't take long. I heard his footsteps, deliberate, heavy, cross the hall. Then his voice muffled at first, then sharp enough to carry through the thin walls. How long has this been going on? A pause. Then Marcy's voice, airy, almost bored. Does it matter? It matters, he snapped. It matters if the baby is mine. It matters if I've been. She cut him off with a laugh that made my stomach tighten. Damon, you couldn't give me the life he can. I froze at the sink. The words weren't just an admission. They were a dismissal. A verdict. You're my wife, Damon said, his voice cracking. Were she corrected? That ended the moment I realized I didn't have to settle for this. Silence then. The sound of movement, drawers opening, hangers scraping against the rod. I stepped into the hall, leaning against the doorway just as Damon emerged, his face pale and rigid. He didn't look at me, only brushed past and sank into the couch like the weight in his chest might keep him there forever. From the bedroom came the rustle of a suitcase zipper. A few minutes later, Marcy appeared, coat over one arm, phone in her hand. She didn't meet my eyes. She didn't say goodbye. Headlights swept across the front windows, and a sleek black sedan rolled to a stop in the driveway. The driver's door opened, and there he was. The man from the photographs. He stepped out, his coat collar turned up against the cold, and took the suitcase from her without a word. She slid into the passenger seat like she'd done it 100 times before. Damon didn't move. He sat hunched forward, hands clasped between his knees, eyes fixed on the floor. The car pulled away. Tail lights glowing red until they disappeared at the corner. The house seemed to exhale with their absence, the tension that had seeped into every room, dissipating into something strange emptiness mixed with relief. I closed the front door and turned the lock, the soft click echoing through the living room. Damon finally looked up at me, and there was nothing left of the defensive wall he'd been holding for months. "She's gone," he said, as if saying it might make it real. I nodded. "Yes, she is." He leaned back, his head resting against the couch cushions, eyes closing. The air between us was heavy, but it wasn't hostile anymore. It was simply quiet. For the first time in months, the house felt like mine again. But it also felt like something else, like the wreckage after a storm, when you're left standing wondering what's still whole and what's beyond repair. I moved to the window, looking out at the empty driveway. The silence wasn't going to stay this way forever. Soon the next step would come, and I needed to be ready when it did. The morning after Marcy left, I woke before dawn. For a moment, lying in bed, I almost expected to hear her voice drifting down the hall, or the clatter of her rearranging cabinets. Instead, there was only stillness, the kind that pressed against the walls and settled into the corners. I made coffee, poured it into my favorite mug, the one she'd pushed to the back of the cupboard, and carried it into the living room. The boxes she'd used to store my things were still stacked against the wall. I set the mug down and started unpacking. One by one, my photographs returned to their places. Damon at 10 years old, grinning through a missing tooth. My parents on their porch. Me and Edris, our arms looped together on a windswept beach. I could feel the air shift as each frame claimed its space again. By mid-morning, I moved to the back of the house, the room that had been meant for the baby. The walls were still painted a soft mint, Marcy's choice. A mobile of plastic moons and stars hung over the crib she'd insisted on assembling in the middle of my house. I stood there a while, the smell of fresh paint and expectation still faint in the air. Then I went to the hardware store. By late afternoon, the windows were open, and I was rolling a fresh coat of warm sand-colored paint over the mint. With each stroke, the room shed a layer of her claim. When the walls dried, I dismantled the crib piece by piece and carried it to the garage. In its place, I set up the oak guest bed I'd stored away, smoothing a quilt over it until the room looked like it belonged here, not like it was waiting for something that would never come. Back in the living room, I moved her vases and knickknacks into a cardboard box, sealing it with tape. That would be the last of it. Damon passed through once, pausing in the doorway as I dusted the bookshelves. He didn't say much, just, "It looks like it used to." "It looks like it should," I corrected, and he nodded before retreating down the hall. By evening, the house felt lighter. My books were back in their places, the kitchen counters were clear, and the faint scent of paint still lingered in the guest room. I walked through each space, slowly letting the quiet settle into me. When I finally sat in my armchair, the one she'd tried to move into storage, I drew a long breath and listened. No footsteps upstairs. No tense conversations leaking through closed doors. Just the hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of the settling house. It was the same silence I'd missed for months, only now it felt different, fuller, heavier in its own way. Was peace always this loud? I didn't have an answer yet, but I knew the next step was coming, and I was ready to meet it head on. The idea came to me a week after the house was quiet again. I was sorting through a box of linens in the guest room, folding them into the cedar chest at the foot of the bed, when I realized the room didn't need to sit empty. I'd reclaimed it, yes, but what if reclaiming it meant more than simply making it mine again? That night over tea, I thought about the months I'd spent feeling unwelcome in my own home. the way it gnawed at my sense of safety, the way it made me question my place. And then I thought of the women I'd met over the years at community events, church suppers, even the grocery store women whose smiles didn't quite reach their eyes. I knew some of their stories, and I could guess at the ones they didn't tell. The next morning, I called Cynthia, an old friend, who volunteered at the local women's shelter. Do you ever have cases where someone's ready to leave but just needs a safe place for a few weeks? I asked. Her voice lit up. All the time. We're almost always at capacity. Why are you thinking of hosting someone? I'm thinking of opening my guest room, rent-free for the first month. Just a bridge until they get on their feet. Cynthia didn't hesitate. That could change lives, Vera. 2 days later, she came by with brochures and a list of guidelines, everything from privacy expectations to safety protocols. We walked through the house together, talking about locked storage space and the quiet comfort a guest would need. She stood in the doorway of the freshly painted room, taking in the quilt, the sun slanting through the window. This feels safe, she said. By the end of the week, I had my first guest. Her name was Lena. She arrived with 2 suitcases and a hollow look in her eyes, her hands trembling as she set them down. I didn't ask questions beyond what was necessary, just showed her the kitchen, the bathroom, the shelf where she could keep her things. That first night, I heard her moving quietly in the kitchen after midnight. In the morning, she apologized. I couldn't sleep, she murmured. You don't have to apologize for existing here, I told her. And I meant it. Days passed, and I watched her shoulders slowly lose their tension. She started taking walks in the afternoons, coming back with small bags of groceries she'd bought herself. She cooked once, just a simple pasta, and left a plate for me on the counter. One evening, as we washed dishes together, she said I didn't think I'd ever feel safe in someone else's house again. I thought about that after she went to bed, about how a space can hold you hostage or set you free depending on who controls the key. The next morning, I emailed Cynthia. Let's make this a regular thing, I wrote. When Lena left 3 weeks later, she hugged me tightly and left a note on the nightstand. You gave me more than a room. You gave me back my air. I stood in the doorway after she was gone, sunlight spilling across the empty bed, and I knew exactly what to do next. 2 weeks after Lena left, Cynthia called again. This time her voice carried both urgency and hope. She's young, Cynthia said. 23. Has a little boy, maybe 2 years old. They just need somewhere stable until she starts her new job. I didn't hesitate. Bring them over this afternoon. I spent the morning airing out the guest room, smoothing the quilt, and placing a small vase of daisies on the nightstand. In the corner, I set a basket of toys I'd picked up at a thrift store, a wooden train, a stack of board books, a soft stuffed rabbit. The house felt different when prepared for a child lighter, somehow. When the knock came, I opened the door to find a slight young woman holding a boy on her hip. She had tired eyes, but a straight posture, the kind of resolve you see in someone who's already fought more battles than she should have had to. This is Mara, Cynthia said, and this is Theo. Theo buried his face in his mother's shoulder, peeking at me with cautious brown eyes. I crouched down slightly. Hi there. Welcome. Mara shifted her weight a little unsure. I don't want to be a burden. You're not, I said firmly. This is your safe place now. I handed her the keys, one for the front door, one for her room. She turned them in her palm like they were something precious. I showed them around the kitchen, stocked with basics, the laundry room, the small backyard where Theo could play. Mara kept nodding, murmuring thank you under her breath, as if afraid the words might not be enough. That evening, I heard Theo's giggles drifting from the guest room as he rolled the little train across the quilt. Mara came into the kitchen while I was drying dishes, holding a baby monitor. He's already more at ease here than he's been in months, she said softly. Over the next week, the house filled with small sounds I hadn't heard in years. Toddler footsteps pattering across the floor, quiet lullabies through the thin wall at night, the clink of mugs as Mara and I shared morning coffee before she left for job interviews. One afternoon, she offered to cook dinner. It was simple grilled chicken roasted vegetables, but she moved in the kitchen with a care that reminded me of how I used to cook when Damon was a boy, making every plate an act of reassurance. As we ate, Theo babbled about the big park they'd visited, and Mara's smile came easier than it had the day she arrived. I didn't think I could start over, she admitted. But being here, it makes me believe I can. After they went to bed that night, I lingered in the living room, listening to the quiet hum of the baby monitor she'd left on the counter. The house felt lived in, not invaded. The energy was warm, not suffocating. For the first time in a long while, I realized I wasn't waiting for the next conflict or betrayal. Instead, I was listening to the steady rhythm of a home that had found its balance again, this time with the right company under its roof.